I pass a bowling alley on my way home every day. It's a funky bowling alley, the kind you'd only find in California. The restaurant serves hot dogs and Korean barbecue. As I was preparing for this sermon, I was tempted to go in and see if anyone in there was bowling alone, in honor of the political scientist Robert Putnam's 1995 discussion about our decreasing tendencies to do things together in this nation. Now, on this campus this week, while in a meeting with a colleague, we were startled and interrupted, in fact, by a really large, I mean dozens, flock of turkeys running pell-mell down that hill over there and yelling at the top of their beaks. Then they came into the parking lot and they all convened and they all started kind of mixing it up. Feathers were flying. We couldn't tell what was happening. It's the third time I've seen that phenomenon this year, but I've never seen it before. And then the next day I drove onto campus, and over on the corner of the campus, there were two young deer resting in the grass. That's not uncommon. But surrounding them were a bunch of turkeys who were all trying to be very close to them. And I've never seen that before either. While frequent before, the appearance of our feathered and four-footed neighbors now is as predictable as the presence of the redwoods. Last year we had a young buck that didn't like to sit on the ground, so he sat on one of our benches every morning. I'll talk more about him, he gets himself in trouble. But as neighborhood apps continue to report the sighting of bobcats and coyotes and even a not so uncommon mountain lion, California scientists are tracking the effects of climate change on all kinds of animals, snakes and salmons, and, I'm afraid, butterflies. So 2 decades later, after the publication of Bowling Alone, Putnam revised his work and noted that actually a lot of the really bad declines he predicted in our social capital happened, and some of them didn't. For example, voting rates were dipping by the mid-1990s on a pretty precipitous curve, but in 2004, they suddenly picked up with a very particular election. Volunteerism, which had remained steady, and then it took a huge dip and basically almost a decline during our pandemic shutdowns. It has not rebounded. The decline in religious participation actually accelerated. That's the bad news for us. And an article from this January in The Guardian confirms that these trends continue. Since 2020, in fact, people report having fewer friends, less connection, less caring in their life, and even less sex. Guardian writer Anton Seliboth calls this a social recession, and he says it's only increased because we are, in fact, trying to figure out how we will connect with each other in this post-2020 world. This is a great time for me to say something I was going to say later, which is people sometimes come up to me and say, I'm so sorry, I was watching this hawk soar in the air behind you while you were preaching. And I say, great, why would you be sorry about that? I'm really glad. So feel free to watch our children as they walk by. It's one of the things I love about this sanctuary. You never know who might walk by. In the meantime, we are becoming increasingly aware that we need one another because of all the things we've talked about. But I think that we are coming to understand that we have been making false divisions in the ways that we need one another. I remember sitting in what we then called social concerns meeting, social action meeting, where we were debating whether our efforts should go more into helping other human beings or helping the environment. And what we know now in 2023 is that all of these forms of community are essentially the same. It is what we need to do is to continue to widen our ability to understand that. San Francisco writer and blogger Rebecca Solnit notes that we often get very heated about beliefs and about small differences we might have in our beliefs. She writes, I have often heard people obsess over polls that revealed how many Americans think climate change is real. They seem convinced that if everyone could be made to believe it, the crisis could be solved. The missing part, she says, is that beliefs do not matter more than actions. They may be important, but they are not the only thing. She says if people believe climate change is real and pressing and do nothing to address the problem, nothing happens. Not only is it unlikely that everyone will agree, it doesn't matter whether they do, and it isn't worth waiting for. There are still people who don't believe, she says, and she points out that women are endowed with the same inalienable rights as men, and this hasn't kept us from creating policies that are based on the principle of equality between the sexes, though we know all of those are fragile in this world. In the face of the almost complete collapse of the Detroit economy in the 1970s, activists began to explore new models. And Solnit points out that one of the myths of colonialism and our inheritance there is the idea of the US being a virgin wilderness before the advent of European settlement. In fact, if we think about it, indigenous people had been long shaping the environment all across this land, adapting it in different ways, where the community was not just human, but also, for many of those communities, tied in with the natural world. So in Detroit, one of the new models that was promoted was by a group called the Gardening Angels. They promoted multi-generational community through wellness gardens, Kwanzaa gardens, youth gardens, school gardens, and, drumroll, church gardens. See me after if you're willing to make that happen. The resilience of the world is something that never fails to interest me in the ways we continue to engage with each other across difference and across even other ways of being. Why can we not begin to engage with each other with respect across species as well? That we need other creatures becomes more and more obvious. A recent United Nations post was titled, "Nature can still heal itself if we just give it the attention it needs." That was the official title of the post. And it highlights the importance of smaller actions, those butterfly wing actions, such as sustainable land management, food choices, and reduced individual consumption. They will not solve this, but they may make a real difference. And the environmental justice movement, which comes out of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, supports individuals in making personal and communal choices to consume as little as possible and to produce as little waste as possible, developing new lifestyles focused on ensuring that we will have communities for future generations. As Detroit activist Grace Lee Boggs, a Chinese-American woman active in the Black Power movement, and her husband, Jimmy Boggs, a Black leader not only in the community but also in the United Auto Workers Union, began to believe we can all make a difference and we can start small. They conceived something called the Detroit Summer as a way of building something up in a city that at that point was an incredible collection of endless empty lots. It was a multiracial, intergenerational program run now fully by its alumni. It taught kids to garden in abandoned lots. It created small micro businesses, and it allowed them to find their own value by working with others. They might have been raising food, but they were also raising their own sense of caring and community. What does interdependence mean in a world where we need to center love? I think it sometimes means putting aside our own personal comfort, and sometimes it will mean insisting on our own personal comfort. It's not going to be one path. It's not going to be one size. It's not going to be one answer. What it is going to be is a lot of conversations, and we need to have the places to have those conversations. It will require a deep ethic of relationship and a deep ethic that says that those relationships extend beyond the human family, and that none of us are going to be free in that family until all of us are free, and none of us are going to be safe until all of us, including Our creeping, crawling, hopping, flocking, yowling, feathered neighbors as well are. Indigenous elders and wisdom keepers have been modeling this for generations, and I was planning in this service to take a moment and honor Dee Simmons and Tony Newey for their work in this congregation. It was one of the reasons that we didn't just swipe by this congregation when we were looking so many years ago, because of the work they were doing here. It is important. These are not new ideas, but they might be new commitments for all of us. What matters, says Rebecca Solnit, is that some of us act. So let's make a commitment to act. Join something. Try something on, maybe a group or two. Show up for some kind of form of connection. Maybe you want to get on our climate action list. Maybe you want to stop and watch a butterfly flutter or a snake slither by. We have lots that we can lend you. Heck, maybe we can all get a group together and go bowling.